Alright, I am back with another video, and today we have a very special video indeed. This is my first ever D&D build. Now, I've used Baldur's Gate 3 for the background footage, and as well, I've deliberately made this a build that can be modded into Baldur's Gate 3 as well, so if you look in the description of the video, you will be able to find a short list of mods that you can use that will help you recreate this build in-game if you wanted to. However, this build was primarily done with Dungeons & Dragons, the tabletop version, in mind, which is going to give me a lot more creative freedom. It's going to allow me to do more interesting concepts without being restricted to just what the game offers, and overall, it's just something new for the channel. Like I said, I've wanted to branch out, and I've been meaning to do this for a while, and after delay, I think I finally got something. Now, obviously, I'm not the first person to ever do this. There are a lot of people who have been doing this much longer than I have, who have got much more experience, and since I've started doing this channel, I've tried not to watch other YouTubers' videos to make sure I'm not accidentally, copying other people's ideas or stepping on their toes or something like that. I'm just kind of putting myself in my own little bubble and trying to create what I think is cool. So if I make a concept or a build that is very similar to someone else's, please know it is entirely unintentional. But if I do intentionally put my own spin on someone else's content, I will put disclaimers at the start of the video, and I will credit them, obviously. This build that I'm doing today is one of my own creation. It's probably nothing too unique. Again, it's absolutely been done before, but my personal spin on it is more of a kind of like backstory and lore type thing, because I'm going to be doing this slightly differently than other creators, because a lot of other creators will look at, the numbers, how to optimize things and this and that. I'm just trying to build characters and concepts that I think are interesting, and I'm hoping that you will too. And of course, any of my builds are usually very, very flexible and can be adjusted for whatever you would like to do with them. So basically the exact same thing as my Baldur's Gate content. It's just I'm presenting a concept to you with an idea of how to build it, and you can adjust and do whatever you like with it. It's entirely up to you. Now, how this build video is going to kind of work is I have the background visuals here, as you can see, which is BG3. I've got a general approximation of what the character looks like in my head over on the left there, as you can see, and I will have text on the screen that you can look at to kind of see the information as I'm talking about it. But this is kind of mainly just going to be an audio medium. Like, you don't actually need the visuals of the video, so if you wanted to like play this and just kind of listen to it while you're doing other stuff, it's perfectly fine. There's nothing that's going to appear on the screen that you need to check back and look for. It's more just the fact that this is a video format, so I needed something in the background, and as such, here we are. Now, as this is my first D&D build coming from Baldur's Gate 3, I'm going to be making mistakes. I almost slipped up a few times whereas certain spells and mechanics work differently in Baldur's Gate 3 to D&D, and I've changed those for this build, but I am going to be making mistakes. My math might be wrong, because if I'm being honest, I'm a total dumbass. I'm not very good at math. So when it comes to certain aspects of the game, I might be a bit off, but this is where I'm learning and growing, so please, if you notice any mistakes, let me know, and I will try and correct those for future videos. But again, I've rambled on long enough, let's get started. Today we are going to be building what I call the Draconic SpellBlade. Now, this is a character that I've had for a very, very long time. If I ever really got into a heavy, long-form D&D campaign, this is the character I would play. It's a character that I've made in many video games a lot of times. There's a heavy dragon theming, and it's heavily inspired by the things that kind of influenced me in my childhood. That being video games like The Legend of Zelda and Devil May Cry, comic book superheroes like Spider-Man, Batman, all of those, and even like the TV shows I used to watch growing up, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, one of the best shows ever made. That Netflix disappoints me. So there's a lot of those kind of influences here, and I think they'll come through as we talk about the character. Now, how this video is going to kind of work is I will go over what I think the main levels of the build are, where the actual build-making process comes in, and then I'll kind of just give a general approximation of the later levels. So similar to Baldur's Gate 3, where we only go to level 12, I'm only going to be going into detailed, heavy explanation of up to level 10, and then the rest of the levels are kind of whatever. You can do whatever you like with them, but I will give a general guideline of how I would do it as well. So sit back, enjoy, get to work on something in the meantime. Maybe you're driving to work, I don't know. Just pop this on in the background and enjoy. So let's start off with the actual character stuff before we even get into the class and all that, like race and background and all that sort of thing. I am reading this off my phone because I've got one of those big flip phones, like the folding phones, because I didn't want like the background footage to lag by tabbing out to another window, so bear with me. Also, I finally got my hands on a boom mic, so my microphone's not just on my desk, so the audio might sound a bit different because the microphone is in a different position, but hopefully it sounds alright. Anyways, so we're going to be starting things off with our race, and I have decided to go with an Aasimar. Now, if you wanted to build a full-on dragon kind of warrior here, Dragonborn would obviously work. The racial choice doesn't matter too much. This was just my personal preference. Aasimar is going to give us quite a few interesting things at level 1. Namely, it's going to give us necrotic and radiant resistance. It's going to give us the light cantrip. Now, I will say this, a lot of D&D content creators, or just people who play D&D in general, say the light cantrip on Aasimar is completely pointless because we already have dark vision. I personally disagree. Just because you have dark vision doesn't mean every player in your party is, or every NPC you come across is. And if you're playing a good party, you're trying to be a heroic party, then maybe you're in a situation where, for example, let's say it's late at night and the village is on fire and you're trying to evacuate people out, but it's dark beyond the bounds of the village, so you start casting the light cantrip on like various objects that you give to the villagers to carry out into the darkness so they can see. Or maybe it's a cave-in, people are collapsed, maybe there's a bunch of miners trapped inside a cave-in, and as such you're casting light on all of their equipment so they have sources of light to be able to guide their way out. It's things like that. You can't just immediately dismiss something like that as being useless when, especially in D&D, there's so many different implications that could come up. In Baldur's Gate 3, perhaps not so much, but definitely in tabletop for sure. You never know exactly what you're going to be getting yourself into. I believe I already mentioned the necrotic and radiant resistance. If I didn't, there you go. 2 resistances right at level 1 is pretty insane. We also gain Healing Hands, which as an action once per long rest, we can touch a creature and heal it for a number of d4s equal to our proficiency bonus. I kind of like the idea of this character having like a healing factor, again, kind of similar to like, you know, comic book superheroes and all that, so I felt like it fit in really nicely. And as an Aasimar, we get to put a +2 into any ability score we like and a +1 into another. As far as like Tasha's rules are concerned, and in fact as far as the source books are concerned, I am considering all officially published Wizards of the Coast content here. So Tasha's, Volo's, Mordekainen's, the basic player book, Fizban's, all that I'm kind of considering with these builds. I'm not going to go too crazy with like Tasha's completely altering all the background stuff just yet until I'm more comfortable with the system. But just so you know, I've gone with, you know, just, I believe, I'll go over the ability scores now, but with that in mind, I've kind of chosen a race anyway, but let's just put those ability scores anywhere. But if I was playing something like a mountain dwarf, I would probably also put those ability scores anywhere instead of just what they tell you to do. As for our starting ability scores, I'm going with an 8 in strength because we don't really need it, 14 in dexterity, mainly for our AC, 16 in constitution for our concentration saving throws and our HP, an intelligence score of 10 and a wisdom score of 10, just because those were dump stats and I felt like it would be nice to kind of spread them out a bit more, and a 16 in charisma. So a fairly standard overall rounded stat spread. Strength being dumped kinda sucks, but I don't think it has as much going for it as it does in Baldur's Gate and regular tabletop. I know it's not exactly tied to like jump distance and all that, so I feel like for what we're going for here, this is a pretty nice stat spread. I'm going to assume, as always, that we're going to be using the point buy method. You can roll for stats if you want, but just make sure you've kind of got your stats in line with what I've outlined here. And I would always go for the gold buy method. The only thing you need to make sure you pick up is a weapon of choice. We're going to be able to use any weapon we really like, but I will probably start with a weapon that you can one-hand for now, so something one-handed or versatile, so you have a hand free for spellcasting, and so I picked my classic choice that is my personal favourite, the long sword for a d8 of damage, but again, use any weapon you like or something that you pick up along the way. And as for our background, I have gone with the Inheritor, because allow me to get into this character's backstory for a minute. I believe that this character would be just kind of a regular person. Again, it's kind of like the hero's tale, your Spider-Mans, your Links from The Legend of Zelda. They're regular kind of people who eventually come into some sort of power. And I believe, straight up inspired by The Legend of Zelda, this character here would find a legendary sword that imbues them with power and kind of causes them to have some sort of awakening. And the weapon I've chosen in particular is what I'm calling the Platinum Fang, which is a long sword with its blade carved out of one of Bahamut's platinum scales, indirectly giving him the powers of a dragon. So, not necessarily being born as like a Draconic sorcerer or anything like that, or directly getting his power from Bahamut or Tiamat or some sort of dragon directly, but just inheriting that power from a blade that innately carries that power. And as such, he gains all sorts of draconic abilities. Again, kind of like, you know, Legend of Zelda and stuff like that, where, you know, you get the Master Sword and it's the Blade of Evil's Bane and such like that. I think it's a really cool concept. I like the idea of like the abilities of the character being directly tied into their weapon, and as such, that's why I said we're going to buy a longsword at the start, and we're just going to flavor that into us getting that weapon. And that's probably spoiled the entire build of like how I'm going to be building this, but you know, I really, really like this concept, and I think you guys will too, especially as we get further into the levels. So, starting things off, we're going to be, at level 1, we're going to be a Draconic Sorcerer. This is going to get us our big bout of dragon theming. We're going to be getting Constitution saving throw proficiency, which is really nice. We're going to get Draconic resilience, so our body is covered in like dragon scales that give us a base AC of 13 plus our dexterity modifier while we're not wearing armor. And I really like the idea of like his body, like once you've obtained the weapon, it starts to like change you start becoming mutated, and I think this character would have like dragon scales all down his chest and arms, so he starts wearing like armor and like a jacket to like kind of hide it so people don't like see it. And when I say armor, I kind of just mean like clothing, like sort of like a light leather clothing / armor thing. Still using Draconic resilience, but you can wear armor with this build if you want to, as we'll get into later. But I like the idea of just having an armor class at all times, especially if you're like ambushed in the night, like after you've taken your armor off or something. Stuff like that. So I quite like the idea of having these like Draconic scales that like the character tries to hide. As for our Draconic ancestor, you can choose any you like, but I always kind of envisioned like this character getting the kind of nickname of the Crimson Dragon because of the deep kind of crimson scales that may have formed, because I feel like the character's personality would kind of come out in the form of their colors, and while crimson is closer to red, so they might be slightly more inclined towards evil, I think that having that surge of power is kind of like, you know, they start off kind of like in a bit of a power-hungry, kind of power-drunk sort of state, but then slowly bring themselves back and are kind of like, well, actually, I can use this power for good, but they're constantly kind of struggling against that raging dragon inside, I guess. It's cringe and cliche as hell, but I still really, really like it, so I think we'll go with that. So any ancestor you want, but I'm personally choosing red for the fire affinity because it's closest, it's like the most common element, so more spells will get advantages from that. But you can choose any ancestor you like, it really doesn't matter. As for our cantrips, I see this character as being a bit of an elemental caster, so pulling in elements from all over the place, not just the one they have affinity with, because I think that you can reflavor things in a lot of ways as well, like Ray of Frost, for example, even though it's not going to do as much damage as Firebolt for us because of our elemental affinity and the like, being able to say like, oh, can I use Ray of Frost to like freeze this, or can I use Shocking Grasp to try and like charge this if you have like maybe like, you know, mechanical stuff or electronic stuff in your game, like things like that. I feel like just covering a lot of different aspects of play with like the different elements can be really, really fun if your DM's cool and you can kind of roleplay with it. So the cantrips I've chosen are as follows: Firebolt as our main damaging ranged cantrip, Ray of Frost for its movement speed reduction effect and obviously what I just mentioned, Lightning Lure to be able to do lightning damage and pull enemies within melee range to you, which is super fun, and Prestidigitation because it is just the kind of best overall roleplay cantrip in the game that has a lot of fun applications and uses if you're clever. As for our level 1 spells, I want 2 elemental spells, and I want to cover as many of the different elements as we can at once. So I've chosen Chromatic Orb, allowing us to create an orb of magic that will allow us to do various different elemental damage types, such as fire, cold, lightning, ice, all that good stuff. It'll be a pretty good damaging spell to start off with when you need one, and I think it works out quite nicely. I've also gone with Absorb Elements, because it's a spell that's not really usually available to us in Baldur's Gate 3, and I like the idea of this character, when hit with elemental damage, it kind of gets absorbed into their body, like through their scales or whatever, through like their draconic heritage, and is able to just blast it back, because Absorb Elements allows you to reduce the damage from an elemental attack you take and then deal it back out on your next attack. For us, that will be a melee attack with our sword, so that's going to be great. So that's level 1, not too much crazy stuff here, it's pretty much just a standard start for your basic level Sorcerer, and I quite like the availability of it, because Draconic Sorcerer is one of the easier kind of sorcerers stuff to understand, so if you're just kind of starting out with D&D, I figured, you know, it would work out quite nicely. And with that, actually, having said that, now that we're kind of into the video a bit and I've got you hooked, I want to announce something. As of right now, I would have probably had some people join from the stream yesterday and all that, but we now have a Discord server live. It's in the About section of the channel. It'll be in the description of this video. Feel free to come in and join, make build requests, discuss the game, and even find people to play with. Anyways, let's keep going. I meant to mention that earlier, and I completely forgot. Can you tell I'm a little bit nervous about doing this build, because I have no idea how it's going to go. Now, as for level 2, we're immediately going to multi-class, and you probably already saw this coming. We're going to pick up SpellBlade. warlock. Because of course we are, we're playing a character who literally gets their powers from a magical sword. I wanted to at least get most of our dragon-themed stuff out the way right at the start, and also get some basic spellcasting ability with the elemental casting from Draconic Sorcerer before we dive into this. And I think it makes sense for this character to have to suddenly kind of come to grips with their dragon powers and get used to the magic stuff first before training in swordplay. And I do think the sword would give them some innate sword fighting ability just right off the bat, but nothing actually concrete. It would be very sloppy, basically like swinging around a baseball bat all willy-nilly rather than actually trying to wield a blade. So I'm going to take these Hexblade levels as a less really, you know, just getting more power from the sword, but really just exploring our, you know, our abilities as this half dragon empowered character, and then training with the blade rather than just leveling up. Like, this is actually us training with the sword, these Hexblade levels, not just getting more power just because. I like that flavoring a bit more. It feels like we're putting more effort in. So, with Hexblade, we are going to get Hex Warrior, which allows us proficiency with medium armor, shields, and martial weapons. So, now you have access to the longsword proficiency that we want. You can use medium armor if you would like as well, which would be great because our AC, our dexterity is just high enough that we could get the max AC out of most medium armor, so that's great. And you're not overly reliant on your unarmored defense, so again, you can kind of wear armor as well, which I think works nicely. And shields, and you'd have to be a bit careful with a shield, because if your DM is very into the whole verbal, somatic, and material component side of things, but if you equip a shield, you're going to also probably want the Warcaster feat so that you can always cast your spells, which kind of sucks. But, you know, that is D&D. Personally, if I DM, I don't really worry about stuff like that. And, like, if it's cool, you can do it. We're having a shield and casting spells isn't probably not going to be the end of the world in most campaigns. But I'm going to be trying to go for this as rules as written, so probably going to skip the shield on this one. I will have an alternative later, but we'll see. And whenever we finish a long rest, this is Hex Warrior again, you can imbue one weapon you touch with your own will. So in our case, our like draconic power. Until our next long rest, we can use it with charisma instead of strength or dexterity, meaning now our longsword is going to be empowered by our charisma. This is like Pact of the Blade from BG3. Absolutely what we want, and getting this at level 1 is so good. So good. And also, in order to do this, we have to be proficient with the weapon, and it cannot have the two-handed property. Well, as long as we don't wield our longsword in two hands, we're absolutely fine. So we're going to be dealing a d8 of damage, but we will gain the ability to two-hand the weapon later quite nicely. You probably can two-hand the weapon, because it's not technically the two-handed property, but you are still two-handing it. I don't know exactly how that works, rules as written, let me know. We also gain access to Hexblade Curse, which we can use once per short rest, and this is a doozy. As a bonus action, I can curse a creature I can see within 30 feet of me for 1 minute. I don't know why I read it like that, that's just how it is on my little paperwork. I have a character sheet in front of me. Basically, we curse it for 1 minute. We add our proficiency bonus to the damage rolls against the cursed target, which is nice. The attack rolls against the cursed target score a critical hit on a 19 or 20, which is also awesome. If the target dies while cursed, we regain HP equal to our warlock level plus our charisma modifier, and the curse ends after 1 minute. When the target dies, we die, or we're incapacitated. That is a level 1 feature. That is all in one level. I can see why Hexblade is considered a broken class. That is insane, but it's absolutely perfect for what we're trying to do. And I actually think, like, it's weird because, again, I'm kind of thinking back to, like, my favorite, like, comic book superheroes, like Spider-Man or whatever. I doubt, I wouldn't actually flavor this as, like, we're actively cursing the target with this. I would say we're, like, taunting them and getting into the witty banter, which is kind of causing us to engage them more directly in the fight as we go back and forth. And I feel like it's almost basically, like, instead of a curse, it's just straight up, like, basically kind of indirectly proclaiming battle with this one individual. And as, like, it could be like, hey, you... ugly, or something like that, and that is kind of like you cursing them, in quotations. I kind of like reflavoring this as more, like, again, I'm taking huge inspiration from comic book superheroes here, and I feel like that kind of works. So rather than a curse, it's more of like a, hey, we're doing this now type thing, and you get to be a bit more engaged in combat, and as such, do a bit more damage. We also get a couple of cantrips, and of course I'm going to be picking up Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade. I mean, it just makes perfect sense. Being able to augment our weapon attacks with more damage thanks through cantrips is really, really good. We'll be able to do things like quicken these later on, and as well just get that extra bit of damage, as well as Booming Blade allowing us to basically trap targets or force them to take damage otherwise, and Green Flame Blade allowing us to spread fire damage to other adjacent enemies. Works out really, really nicely. As for our 2 first level spells, I am going for the quite obvious choices here. We're going for Hex and Shield. Hex is going to allow us to use our concentration, which we're not really using for anything else yet, to basically do extra necrotic damage to another enemy, and I would again kind of set that up the same way I would the Hexblade's Curse. Rather than actually hexing somebody, we're kind of just getting really into the thick of it and allowing our Draconic power to exert over them, basically just adding more power into our strikes. And Shield is, for obvious reasons, it's just a quick bump to our AC. We're also going to be getting Warlock spell slots as well, so it means now we're going to have a spell slot that's going to recover on a short rest and such like that. I'm not going to go majorly into detail about how every class and everything works. Like, you guys can read up on that on your own, but I'm assuming most people who watch this video probably already know how the majority of it works. I will also have a full character sheet as well that I'll link in the description for you guys to have a look at. That shows the complete levels up to 20, so you can kind of have a look at all the features and the like. So that will all be available as well, so you can see kind of what this character looks like as you progress. So I'm trying to make this as accessible as possible. Next up, we're going to, at level 3, we're going to be continuing with Hexblade. We're pretty much going to go with Hexblade levels now until I'm done with it. So, Hexblade Warlock level 2. Now, because we're at total level 3, our full Aasimar power is going to awaken. I chose the Radiant Soul Aasimar from the Multiverse book, which basically means that now, at level 3, we can, as a bonus action once per long rest, we can transform and gain spectral wings that give us a flying speed equal to our walking speed. These last for 1 minute or until we dismiss them as a bonus action, and once on each of our turns while active, we can deal our proficiency bonus in radiant damage to 1 target damaged by an attack or spell. So, combine this with... So basically, the way I flavor this is we're less like getting like spectral angel wings, but we're almost doing like a Devil May Cry style devil trigger, but it's for dragons. So I think at this point our full draconic heritage would come out. We get scales on our face, our hair kind of shifts to a more crimson color, the wings come out of our back, we have like claws on the end of our hands and like armored and like kind of scaled plating on the backs of our hands, and we just look way more draconic. So again, it's like devil trigger but for like a dragon aspect, and I think that would work so cool. And getting that at level 3, so quite early on, before we'd get like the Draconic Sorcerer wings at like level 14 or whatever, like it's so cool. And also because of Hexblade's Curse and Radiant Soul, we'd be adding our proficiency bonus to the attacks to our attacks twice, meaning we're going to be doing pretty decent damage for that 1 minute where we have both Curse and Radiant Soul up. Unfortunately, they both cost a bonus action, so you're going to have to do one after the other, but like on subsequent turns, but you're still going to be dealing a ton of damage in the meantime. It is really cool, and I absolutely love that theming of it, of literally just being able to go boom, dragon transformation from level 3. That is the main reason I went Aasimar, and I think it is perfect here. And we also do get to pick up evocations. Now, we get 2, and we can train them out each level. So I'm only going to mention 1 here, because I'm going to want to immediately train out the second one for one that we're going to get at Hexblade level 3. But I'll talk about the one that I want to get right away. I want Eldritch Sight, allowing us to cast Detect Magic at will without using a spell slot. The idea of this character having a passive magic sense, essentially, that basically comes online whenever they're not concentrating on something in combat, felt really cool to me, just being able to have this passive magic sense. Again, almost like the Spider Sense from Spider-Man in a way, but just for magic. I just really liked that. For both roleplay, thematically, just for the character. It just seems so cool, and I really wanted it, so I picked up Eldritch Sight as one of our 2 invocations. And now, let's get into level 4 with Hexblade Warlock 3. This means we now get to pick our pact, and I think this one's pretty obvious. We're going with Pact of the Blade. As an action, we can create a pact weapon in an empty hand, and are proficient in its use. We can choose the type of melee weapon every time we create it, and it has those stats. The weapon disappears if it is more than 5 feet away for 1 minute, and the weapon counts as magical, and you can transform any magic weapon into your pact weapon. Now, the longsword that we have from the start of the campaign would not be magical. It would just be a basic longsword. So the way I'd kind of reflavor it from this point is that the sword is no longer something you have to physically carry on your person. It is now just a part of your being, so you can summon it at will. So I would just say that the pact weapon that we get now is the exact same weapon we've just been using this whole time, except now we have a bit more magical control over it, being able to summon it and resummon it, and make it disappear, and all that sort of thing. Basically, it's just a lot of flavor stuff that is really, really nice. But now we actually have a magical weapon for the purposes of overcoming resistance to non-magical damage, which is super good. We're going to be much more effective with that as well. But if you wanted to, if for example you managed to pick up maybe a +1 weapon that is magical, like maybe a +1 longsword or something like that, and you want to use that as your pact weapon, you can do a ritual to turn that into your pact weapon and gain all these benefits anyway. So you have a lot of freedom mechanically and flavor-wise just to kind of make this work if you so choose. And you can use an action to resummon the weapon in any form, and you can dismiss it with no action. So I would probably stick to the longsword, me personally, but the idea of it maybe now that you have enough control over your weapon that you can change its form into different things actually does sound really cool to me, so feel free to play around with that concept as much as you like. But this is also going to get us into our second evocation that I will be choosing here, which is Improved Pact Weapon. We can use any pact weapon we create as a spellcasting focus for warlock spells. This will allow us to two-hand our longsword and still be able to cast warlock spells without any problem if we're going with the, somatic and verbal and material and all that. So now we get that D10 of damage instead of a D8, so it's a nice little upgrade, but be warned that this is only for warlock spells. If you want to cast your sorcerer spells, you're going to have to un-two-hand it, and I'm not exactly sure. For me, it seems to be a bit up in the air if, like, changing how many hands you're holding your weapon with in a combat is like an action or a bonus action or what. Please let me know. But I would just say, like, oh, I'm one-handing my weapon now when I fire a blast. You know what I mean? Again, if your DM is not a total stickler for, like, every single written rule, then it's probably not going to matter too much, but again, you never know which group you're going to be playing with. Unless you do, because you used my Discord and you found a group from our community. Shameless plug, shameless plug. Any pact weapon we create is a +1 magic weapon if it isn't already a +1 magical weapon. So now, if we didn't get a pact weapon before, if our previous pact weapon wasn't already +1 and magical, it now is, which is perfect. And we can also conjure a crossbow, longbow, or light or heavy crossbow as our pact weapon. So now we have access to ranged weapons as well. So if that's your shtick, you've got that. Basically, this is just going to give our weapons a lot more versatility, both roleplay and mechanics-wise, and just a little bit of a power boost if your DM is being stingy with +1 magic items, I guess. Not overall as important as it is in Baldur's Gate 3, where you get a lot more out of Pact of the Blade. Again, they kind of just rolled a lot of Hexblade stuff into Pact of the Blade with Warlock, but, it's still quite a nice little boost to our overall kit. We also do get second level spells at this level as well, and I've decided to pick up two things. Misty Step, because it is obviously one of the most versatile and useful spells in the game. Being able to teleport is really, really nice. And Armor of Agathis. The only thing that worries me sometimes with this build is the lack of HP. We do get extra HP from Draconic Sorcerer, and our Constitution is at a decent level, but having Armor of Agathis to be able to give us another big bulk of temporary HP is quite nice. At level 5, we're going to be a Hexblade Warlock level 4, meaning we get our first ability score improvement, and I'm just going to do the obvious thing here and put a +2 into our Charisma, giving us a total of 18 Charisma, which is going to be really, really nice for us. We do get another cantrip at this level. I've decided to go with Sword Burst. I've kind of decided to treat Booming Blade, Green Flame Blade, and Sword Burst here as kind of like special attacks. Again, kind of reminiscent of like Legend of Zelda and Devil May Cry. So Sword Burst, you're more or less kind of doing like a whirlwind spin attack. Booming Blade, you're just kind of putting a bunch more force into it and knocking your opponent back and forcing them to kind of like deal with the reverberation. And Green Flame Blade is obvious. You're lighting your sword on fire with your own dragon magic. Stuff like that. So I've kind of just decided to pick that up as like another extra attack. And it does force damage as well. So you're diversifying your damage types if you need it, because I think force damage will work better against like inanimate objects as well if you've got to like bust down a door or something. So I think that works out quite nicely. And we do get to pick up a spell at this level, and I'm going to pick up Branding Smite. We are an Aasimar at the end of the day and are doing radiant damage with our Radiant Soul attacks. With our proficiency bonus, so having a kind of radiant attack, again kind of borrowing from Bahamut's radiant dragon breath, I think that makes sense. This does use our concentration, so it would drop Hex if you're using that, but I kind of still just wanted to pick it up because I thought I mean, we're not playing a paladin because we're not directly getting our power from a deity like Bahamut. We're just kind of unknowingly taking some of his power through a sword. And I'll get more into the lore stuff later, maybe, if I feel like it, as to why we have this blade and why it exists, but we'll see. But anyways, with that, there's not too much for that level. We're going to move on to Hexblade Warlock level 5. And we finally get to pick another invocation, and this one is one of the most important. We're getting Thirsting Blade, which whenever we make an attack action, we can attack twice with our pact weapon. So it's essentially extra attack with our special longsword that we have. So there we go. Full martial capability. One level less than usual because, of course, we started off as a sorcerer, but now that we have extra attack, we can now just do all the sword stuff. I would say at this point, our sword training is pretty much complete. And we also do get a level 3 spell. We're up to level 3 spell slots with Warlock as well, which is really nice. We get 2. And, of course, for our level 3 spell, I'm going to choose Counter Spell. This means we don't have to pick it up as a sorcerer later. It's a really useful spell that's going to help out the whole party. It's not concentration-based, so you're not going to break things like Hex if you decide to use it. Overall, I think it is quite a strong option for us here. And with that, we are done with Hexblade Warlock levels. I didn't really see a reason to go much higher, and I kind of wanted to just get more spells overall, because I see this character as mostly a spellcaster first and a martial fighter second, but the fact that we can do both is really, really nice. So, moving off of Hexblade Warlock now, we're going to go back with level 7 to Draconic Sorcerer 2. This is going to give us our Font of Magic, which is our sorcery points. We gain +1 per level with 20 at max level, so for us at this point, since we're going the rest of the way, we'll have 15 by the end. We can exchange these points for spell slots, and vice versa, so we can exchange spell slots for points, which will allow us to fuel meta magic options and such like that. And we're also going to be able to pick up another level 1 spell, and I'm going to choose Ice Knife. It's another really decent elemental spell that's going to have a bunch of different utility for us, so I decided to pick that up here. Again, in my Discord, I've linked resources for all the extra details that you will need, so different sources of information are based on D&D, so if you don't know what all of these spells do to their exact mechanics, I mean, you could Google it, or you can use the resources I've provided. Next up, we are going to level up again in Draconic Sorcerer to Draconic Sorcerer 3, allowing us to get Meta Magic, and I'm not exactly shaking the boat here or doing anything too unique. We're picking up 2 Meta Magic options, and they are the best ones. Quicken Spell is going to allow us to cast a spell with a time of 1 action. We can cast it as a bonus action instead. Perfect. And with Twin Spell, if a spell or cantrip has a target of 1 and not self, we can aim it at a second target within range. Overall, I think this is going to give us a ton of versatility. I mean, you already know it, like Twin Haste and all that, Quicken Fireball, all that good stuff. It doesn't say here if you can quicken cantrips, and I wasn't 100% sure if that's how it worked, but if you can, that could help because you could go for like attack, extra attack, and then Quicken Booming Blade, stuff like that. There's a lot of power to be had there if that works the way I think it does, which I think it does. I would let it work that way in my own games. We also do get to pick up a level 2 spell. We're up to level 2 spells at this point, and I have gone for Scorching Ray. Big multi-target fire damage attack, absolutely something that we want to pick up. Perfect for this build. Makes sense. And it's in theme with our fire theming. We go next at level 9 to Draconic Sorcerer level 4, which means we're going to gain an ability score improvement, and I have decided, I mean, you can put this into anything you like. You could go to the 20 Charisma if you like, you could put it into Dex for more AC if you're so inclined, but if you're wearing medium armor, you might not need to do that so much. I have decided to go with a +2 to our Constitution, because if we go with a +2 to our Constitution, we are going to get, you know, more HP overall, better constitution saves, because again, this is a frontline fighter that mainly takes sorcerer levels, so we are going to want that extra bit of HP where we can get it, and again, we want to be able to maintain concentration as much as possible, so I think that constitution, this is a nice place to do it. We don't really need 20 charisma at this level. Like, we don't. 18 is still perfectly fine, but if you feel like you just want to go gunning straight for that 20 charisma, nothing's going to stop you. I've also decided to pick up Rhyme's Binding Ice as our other spell, as for another elemental spell, but it's going to give us a bit of battlefield control. Again, look up these spells if you want more information, because if I explain every single spell, we're going to be here a while. And then finally, at level 10, we are now a Draconic Sorcerer 5, Hexblade Warrior 5, and we're picking up another level 3 spell, and of course, we've already got Counterspell, so we're grabbing Haste. Haste is going to allow us to make an extra attack, as after making both our attack and extra attack that we already have, so for a total of 3 attacks per turn. It is not like Baldur's Gate 3 Haste, where you can do any other action, you are limited to attack, disengage, help, dash, all kind of like the basic actions. So for us, it's basically just another attack, but we're also getting a +2 to AC and more movement speed as well. So again, that's going to help with our survivability. And that is kind of the big bulk of the kit. By the time you've reached level 10, you've got everything I would say that this build wants. You've got haste, you've got spellcasting, you've got blade work, you've got everything. You've got your dragon transformation, you've got all the theming, you've got decent stats, you've got everything you could want. This is kind of where the build has come together, and since most campaigns don't really go to the very, very high levels, I would say like kind of like 12 and above, I think stopping around the like 10 to 12 range with the detailed explanation is pretty good. I'm going to quickly go over what I would do for levels 11 to 20, but it's going to be a bit more of a just generalization. You're going to get 2 ability score improvements between levels 11 and 20, and I would put a +2 into Charisma next, maxing that out, and then grab a +2 to Dex towards the end to have 16 Dex for a bit more AC. And at Draconic level, and in that Draconic Sorcerer 6 specifically, you're going to grab Elemental Affinity, which will allow you to add your Charisma modifier to 1 damage roll of a spell, if it does matching damage, so for us, fire spells. And you can also spend a sorcery point to gain resistance to this for 1 hour. Don't ever do that, it's a waste of sorcery points. And for the record, the final build is Draconic Sorcerer 15, Hexblade Warrior 5. We're just going the rest of the way in Draconic Sorcerer because it's fairly simple, keeps things easy breezy, but is also quite effective overall, getting us a ton of spell slots. So again, all the information will be in the description as usual. You're also going to get another meta magic option as you level up, and I've decided to go for Transmuted Spell. When you cast a spell that deals a type of damage from the following list, you can spend 1 sorcery point to change that damage to one of the other listed types, and it's all the elemental stuff: acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, and thunder. Basically all of the dragon elements, so we absolutely want this. It's super perfect for the build, because then you can create like a lightning bolt, and then ignite it with your Crimson Dragon power and turn it into a fire-based spell, which I think is such a cool idea. A fire bolt, if you will. Not the cantrip. And these spells I would kind of pick up along the way as you level up. Fireball, obvious choice, powerful level 3 fire spell. Lightning Bolt, really, really awesome. Ice Storm, allowing you to kind of do big ice damage and lock things down. Summon Draconic Spirit, literally letting you summon a, like, spectral dragon that fights alongside you, which is really cool. Chain Lightning, again kind of like Lightning Bolt, big lightning damage that spreads across enemies. Draconic Firestorm, I believe yeah, okay, so that's a typo. That's meant to say Draconic, what's the name of the spell? There's a spell that lets you kind of like gain a full Draconic form with like a breath weapon and all that. It'll be up on the screen because I've made a typo in my bloody script. Because of course I have, but that's the beauty of a visual medium. But long story short, you kind of get to, you basically get to transform, you gain like dragon wings, which we already kind of get through Radiant Soul, but it's another way of getting it. You get to augment your attacks, you gain a breath weapon. There's a ton of cool stuff there. Again, I'll have the full information in the description and on screen. We gain Firestorm, which is what it's meant to be, so yeah, we would gain Firestorm as a 7th level spell as well, which is really, really nice, or as our next spell, which again is just a big fire attack. And then finally, our final spell that we're going to pick up is Sunburst, which I think is a culmination of all of Bahamut's power finally coming out of us and doing a big radiant blast. I wanted a Kamehameha, okay? Leave me alone. It's cool, man. Although this is more of a burst than a sunbeam, so, I mean, you could pick up Sunbeam if you want. Now, with my Baldur's Gate 3 builds, I always go over equipment, because equipment is fixed. But of course, in a Dungeons & Dragons campaign being run by a real human being, no equipment is ever guaranteed anymore. That's just not how the game works. However, if you were to speak to your DM, and I'm not saying like, oh DM, I want these magic items, so give them to me because they're important for my build. No, don't do that. But just say to your DM like, hey, these are some magic items I think would be really cool if I could pick them up like maybe in a shop or something throughout the campaign. Or maybe if you are in a shop looking for things like a magic shop, you say, hey, is there one of these around? Or maybe like just talk to your DM, and then I'm sure they'll be reasonable. I have decided that for these Baldur's Gate 3 videos, I am going to include reasonable magic items, stuff of rarity or lower, so nothing legendary or whatever, that would supplement this build, but not really like be something that I would actively build around. But if your DM lets you pick up these items during the campaign, they'd be quite nice. I've got 2 here. First up is the Flame Tongue Longsword. As a bonus action, you can speak the command word of this magic longsword, causing flames to erupt from it. The flames add a plus 2d6 of fire damage and shine a bright light in a 40-foot radius, and dim light for an additional 40. The flames last until I speak the command word again, or use a bonus action to sheath it. or as a bonus action, sorry, or sheath it, my apologies. Basically just a sword that perfectly fits, basically just upgrading your already existing Bahamut's Blade, or the Platinum Fang as I called it, with an innate fire buff, which I think would be perfect for this build. A little bit strong, definitely something you'd probably get closer to the later levels that I've discussed here, but I think it would be really, really nice for this build, but again, not necessary. We have a lot of options for stuff like that as we go as well. The other item I would maybe ask for is the Braces of Defense, just basically allowing you to gain a +2 bonus to AC, but only if not wearing armor or using a shield. So if you end up not using medium armor and you go with the Unarmored Defense, the Draconic Resilience, basically relying just on your Dragon Scales, the Braces of Defense would just give you a +2 to AC and not affect your ability to cast spells with somatic or material components, because they're not taking up any space in your hands. So it's basically kind of getting basically a Warcaster shield boost without actually needing Warcaster. I feel like those aren't too unreasonable to grab, but again, your DM may think otherwise. Never badger your DM for these items. Just say, hey, this might be cool if I could find one of these, and your DM may let you. Who knows? You may have a cool DM, you might not. Hey, actually, no, all DMs are cool. Except for the ones on RPG Horror Stories, but you know what I mean. Right, now, this is where things are going to get a bit weird for me, because obviously I can't do a combat showcase like I normally would. And I was kind of umming and ahhing about how to kind of show off this build's power on average without being able to do combat. So I've come up with, and this was kind of what was suggested to me, I've gone for DPR at level 10. For those of you that don't know, DPR means damage per round. So with this, I've kind of done some basic calculations, and again, I'm kind of dumb, so I may have got things wrong here. But I've decided to take the final levels that I kind of explained in detail, so that being up to level 10, and I decided to take a look at the build's damage per round with our abilities as we have them. So, let's get into the math here. Again, this will all be on screen, but bear with me. So, with our Hexblade Pact Longsword, so our Pact of the Blade Hexblade Infused Longsword, we are going to be two-handing it for 1d10 plus 5 damage. So that's our ability modifier with our 18 charisma and all that sort of thing. So this is assuming we're two-handing the weapon. You might be one-handing it, but for two-handed, we get 1d10 plus 5 damage. With haste and extra attack from Thirsting Blade, we have a total of 3 attacks per turn. This is just regular attacks, by the way, that I'm calculating right now. I have a few different calculations. Now, assuming average rolls, which is what I'm doing for this, so I'm going to be splitting that 1d10 straight down the middle for a flat 5. We get to, we basically get to do 5 damage from our d10, plus our added 5 from our charisma modifier, and we're going to do that 3 times for 3 attacks, so that's 30 damage per round, with just regular attacks, as long as we have haste up. Nothing too crazy there. I mean, when you consider that a CR10 enemy, like for example maybe a young dragon, and a CR10 is about probably what you'll be fighting with a party at this level, they have HP in like around the 200 range, so like I think a young dragon has about 170. That's okay. But with Hexblade's Curse, it's instead of it being a 5 plus 5 times 3, it's 5 plus 9 times 3, because we're adding on our proficiency bonus, which equals 42 DPR, which is not bad. So you're doing 42 damage in a turn on average, and that can be higher, that can be lower. That is not taking into account if you use Radiant Soul, or if you quicken spell like a Booming Blade or something on top of that to do even more damage, which would obviously take it up quite a decent chunk higher. So this is actually lowballing the damage numbers for this build quite a bit. Now, if you are using haste instead of hex with Hexblade's Curse instead, so you're doing 2 attacks instead of 3, but you're getting the extra 1d6 necrotic damage, that is a 5 plus 9 plus 3 times 2 for 34 DPR, so not as much as Hexblade Curse with the 3 attacks, but if you don't have access to haste, maybe you've run out of level 3 spell slots, hex is a decent alternative. You're losing a bit of damage, but you're still doing more than just attacking regularly. Now, if you were to, instead of using your regular attacks, you wanted to use Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade, you could do this instead. Basically, because Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade, both at their base at this level, will deal an extra 1d8 of damage, whether that's fire or thunder. So with haste, curse, and 1 extra regular attack, because we have haste, So we would be casting the cantrip and then being able to do a hasted attack. So that's 2 attacks, 1 cantrip, 1 regular attack. We would do 31 DPR, because that's the cantrip damage added with our regular attack and all that. So, again, just slightly above just doing regular damage. Again, this is all assuming average rolls, so in the case of 1d8, I'm going for a flat 4 damage. So again, this could be higher if you roll well. It could also be lower if you roll poorly. That's just how math works. But if we assume that you're going to be getting the extra damage from the cantrip's secondary effects, at this level, Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade would both deal... I believe Booming Blade does 2d8, and I believe Green Flame Blade does 2d... No, it does 1d8 plus 4. So both would average out to an extra 8 damage. So both Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade with the extra damage from their secondary effects would deal 39 DPR, which is pretty good. That's almost as close as our previous highest DPR of 42. But Booming Blade, if you're not doing that damage, that's going to lock an enemy in place, stopping them from moving or forcing them to move to deal that damage. And Green Flame Blade is spreading that extra damage to other enemies, so it's better for, group control. I apologize if my thoughts are a bit all over the place there. Again, I'm hoping the on-screen visuals will help a bit. So, if you think about it this way, again, if we're fighting that young dragon, and we're doing the most damage we can in a turn, which is 42 DPR, that's taking out, again, if it's assuming we're around, 178 HP, which I think is how much a young dragon has from my testing, we can take that thing out in about 4.5 turns, I believe, if my math is correct off the top of my head. Which is not bad, but of course that's not assuming that the dragon is not going to absolutely obliterate us. And again, none of this damage took into account Radiant Soul or any quickened spells or anything like that. So again, I am pretty heavily lowballing the damage numbers that this build can put out, as well as the fact that you're going to have teammates. That's the whole point of this. This is just how much this build does on its own, but if you have other equally powerful teammates or teammates that are able to help you out in other ways, the whole point of this build is it works really well with others. Yes, it has a lot of protagonist syndrome just from the background story of how you have the legendary weapon of Bahamut and all this sort of thing, but I feel like the character themselves is a very inexperienced person. They've suddenly come into this power, and as such they are still relying on others, and you can use your twin spell to buff another ally with haste. You can still be that support sorcerer with counterspell and things like that. Nothing really changes there. You can still be a really great team player while also still being able to do your own thing. But the thing is this build is still self-sufficient on its own, which is really nice. You're not reliant on your teammates to do things for you to make you powerful, so that you're not constantly badgering the other players to do things to make you stronger. You can be self-sufficient, or you can help each other out, and I feel like this build, as in particular, is a nice one. I think it works well as a kind of first build, at least for me, in a way, since it's single ability skill dependent. You're not doing too crazy multi-classing, you're literally just taking 5 levels in one other class and then going back to the main stuff. You just have a lot of cool stuff to work with. You just have to be reminded of your damage modifiers, when to use your transformations, when to use certain spells, and I feel like this build has a ton of roleplay potential. You're putting a lot in the DM's court as to why the blade exists. My own headcanon, because I have a homebrew setting, is that a long time ago there was a war between Bahamut and Tiamat on the mortal plane, where a lot of people died, but it also, as wartime does, it causes technology to advance. So in my own homebrew setting, technology is slightly more modern, maybe mid-2000s level. There's flip phones and such. And after the war, where Tiamat got sealed away in the Nine Hells and Bahamut ascended to the realm of the gods, this blade that was used to help seal Tiamat away was left behind, and as such, it had been lost to time until our main protagonist eventually finds it. And I would even say that maybe in the case of creating some drama, the DM could do something like maybe the blade was, because it was used to seal Tiamat away, was actually tainted with some of her power, and as such is why the protagonist may have conflicts of good and evil and fighting certain urges and such like that. A bit like the Dark Urge from BG3, but not quite as murdery. Just stuff like that. You just say that, oh yeah, my character has this mythical weapon, but doesn't understand the origin or where it comes from or stuff like that, only that it's draconic in nature. The DM can go absolutely wild with that. And I think this character concept would give the DM a lot of room to play around. So I really, really like this. I think it works out quite nicely overall. And it's a fun build both thematically and mechanically, like again being able to combine melee combat with spellcasting, because again you can play at range, you can be firebolts, you can do firebolt and stuff like that. I deliberately avoided taking Eldritch Blast with this build because I just didn't want it, because I don't think it fits with the build at all and what I'm trying to go for, and I feel like it would just override, you know, all the good stuff. And I mean, Firebolt kind of does similar damage to Eldritch Blast in a weird way. Obviously, Agonizing Blast would make it stronger, but we're not taking that here, so it doesn't really matter. So, Firebolt, I think, makes more sense for this build anyway. We're going to be dealing, I think at this level, we would be dealing 2d10 damage with that. So, if you wanted to, you could gain more damage by Quicken Spell Firebolt as well on the end of these combos. Like, stuff like that, right? There's just a ton of versatility you can get with this build. Now, I'm not entirely sure how long I've been recording for, because it has been a hot minute. Let me just check. No, don't open that. I've just messed stuff up. Yeah, I've been recording for a while, so I'll leave it here. Again, hopefully, for a first attempt at making a D&D build, I hope this is quite good. Again, I wanted to create a concept that I personally enjoy. This is a character I've sat on for a long time, and, you know, I wanted to create a build that could, that while I personally love it, and can be played rather well, just in tabletop, it can also be recreated in Baldur's Gate 3, so I'm not completely alienating my audience. Obviously, you need mods to recreate this in full. You're going to need the Hexblade mod, you're going to need D&D spells, you're going to need all that sort of thing. But again, all those resources will be linked in the description. And I'll say this once again, don't forget to check out the Discord, where I have a ton of resources, spaces to find games, stuff to request builds from me, all sorts of other things. Please do check out the Discord, link will be in the description. It's on the About section of the channel and all that good stuff. Right, that is going to do it from me. Yeah, I think that's everything. Let me know if I probably missed a bunch of stuff again. I'm just kind of freeballing this sort of thing, kind of giving you guys a character concept and a general leveling scheme to work off of. You may think that like some level 6 like Hexblade feature might be good or something. I don't know. It's entirely up to you. Play this build how you like. Right, that is actually going to do it from me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Oh god, I hope that went well. I probably messed all of that up, but oh well. Still learning.